Hey everyone, welcome to You Own It with Jerry Thompson. I'm glad you could join us this month. I stopped counting episodes, so I'm not going to let you know what episode is, but it's in the teens. It's been well over a year and a half, and today is Halloween. It's the end of October here in Buffalo. The weather is a little gray, a little rainy, but hopefully the rain holds up so the kids get to get out trick or treating. And it's also Bills Kansas City week here, so go Bills on Sunday. Today, I'm going to do something a little different. I know most of the episodes I've so far have talked about different ways to buy a house, different ways to sell a house, marketing, um, financing, the steps to hiring an agent, all of those sort of things. But today, I want to talk about something that um, even me up to a week ago was saying that doesn't happen here. And I'm going to tell you a story, something to be cautious about. I'm going to talk about fraud in real estate and deed theft. And I'll tell you why. I'm going to tell you an actual story. The names will be not disclosed because things are still ongoing there. But this was a bit of a shock to me. And it was something that I went through with a previous client of mine, only kind of helping them out. And I managed to get them in the right track, and hopefully it all works out for them. But people will, you'll get often, if you read articles, things warning about fraud, AI fraud, bank fraud, theft. Believe it or not, there is such a thing as deed fraud, um, where somebody will pretend they are you if you own a property, and they will sell it to somebody else who will pay them, not you, for your property. And let me tell you what happens. And then towards the end of this, stick around. I'm going to tell you a couple things you can do to attempt to protect yourself. And also what happens if something happens to you. I learned all of this week. So on Tuesday this week, I was driving back from an appointment in Delavan, New York, where I was showing a house about 30 minutes back. And I received a phone call from a client of mine in Florida. And this client said to me, it was, 7 in the evening, Jerry, I got this letter, and maybe you can help. You're the real estate broker in the area that I sold my house with a few years ago. And I just need your opinion. What do you think of this letter? Does this mean anything? Should I throw it out? And the letter was from the Erie County Clerk's office. And it said, Dear Mr. and Mrs., this is just to let you know that we transferred title to your vacant lot from you to such and such on October 16th. It was a notice that their title had been transferred. Now, this individual lived in Florida, been out of Western New York for a while. I sold their house for them 4 or 5 years ago, and they kept a piece of vacant land, a legal building lot, just in case they wanted to come back and build on it, or whether or not they wanted to sell it again as an investment in the future. Because they were in Florida, they don't drive by the lot. They don't pay much attention to it. They pay the taxes regularly. He had gotten the letter, and the first thing he thought of is, this is just it's just one of those nuisance letters you get, and was going to throw it out. But before he threw it out, he thought he should call me and ask. So I asked him a few questions. I said, hey, do you have children with power of attorney? Could the deed have transferred? And he said, no, we didn't sell it. We didn't want to sell it. We've never done anything. And I said, well, I don't know. I've never had this happen, but if you'd like, I'm on my way back to my office, and I happen to be on the way back to the office. I'll take a look through what I can find on my multiple listing data and public records, and I'll see if there's any indication that something's gone awry. So the first thing I do want to mention is the Erie County Clerk's office, Michael Kearns. That office deserves to be commended because they have a system in place. When a deed is transferred, they do give notice to people that's doing so. So if you get a letter like that ever, pay attention to it. Thank you, Erie County Clerk's office, for doing a good job on this, because they notified my owner of something could be up. So I went to the office because this client of mine had asked me, can you just check this out? It just something doesn't feel right. I pulled the multiple listing system up, And all of a sudden, a listing came up. The property had been listed. I think it was back in July, maybe August, for 2 days. It was on the market for 2 days with a real estate company. I didn't know the listing broker. Was listed for close to $90,000. Sold right away, 2 days. So it was on the market for 2 days. Sold. Then I thought, well, this doesn't make any sense. I knew my client didn't sell the property. He was on my phone and I knew it was him. It wasn't a fake person. It was somebody I've talked to regularly. I know them. I know their voice. Him and his wife were in the speaker. They were obviously upset that something could have occurred. And so I called the listing agent and I said, hey, I see that you sold this lot on such and such an address. It looks like it closed in October, just a couple weeks ago. And I have a question for you because the individual that you've listed as your owners are clients of mine. I sold the house and back of this lot to them or for them when they moved out of the area. Did you ever meet the owner? Did you ever talk to the owner? And the agent said, well, we've talked to the owner, but we've never met them in person. They're out of town. Everything was mostly done by email. And I said, okay, thank you very much. Appreciate the information. I called my owner back. My owner said, wasn't us. So the next thing that I did is I called an attorney friend of mine that I know well, who answers my call at 8:00 at night because he's a personal friend, not just an attorney. And I said, do you remember? And he had actually represented this client. I said, do you remember such and such? And he kept this land behind his house. They claimed they did not sell their property, and it looks like it was listed under their name. Somebody bought it, and how does this happen? And we kind of went through all the different options. And the attorney friend of mine said, I bet you that the deed that was the deed used to transfer the property from the seller to the buyer was not done in person, that it was an out-of-state notary. Now, New York State during COVID changed some laws that allow sellers of property to not attend the closing or not show up at their lawyer's office, not document who they are. They can go to an out-of-state notary, some notary in Wyoming or Texas, get somebody to notarize they are who they are, sign the deed, send it back to an attorney here, and close the property. Now, I'm not trying to sling mud at anybody here, but there are some steps that can be done, which I'll talk about at the end, that people can do, and the Bar Association should do in Erie County, and agents in Erie County should do to stop this from happening. But in any event, I called back the listing agent, and I said, by any chance, do you know if this fake owner attended the closing and documented who they are, or did they do an out-of-state notary? And the agent said, well, that's funny you should say that because they did an out-of-state notarization. All the closing documents were done out of state. And I said, well, I think we have a case of fraud here. And I think that you sold a property for a fake owner, not the real owner. And I think it was closed so that the buyer of the land is now in a position where they've given over close to $100,000, and they technically have a deed that's going to be challenged because it's fraudulent. So now the buyer is at risk as well. So I said to the agent, can you reach out to the seller's attorney, tomorrow, whatever you're going to do, to let them know there could be a problem here? And so the agent reached the seller's attorney, which I was grateful for because let me just tell you, in Erie County, the real estate community is small. The real estate Bar Association members that do real estate is a small community. For the most part, we try to be cooperative and helpful. And in this case, that attorney took my call at like 8:30 at night because now I have a completely panicked client in Florida who did not sell their lot did not get any money for it. That deed was transferred under their name to a new buyer. There's apparently a buyer that just paid close to $100,000 for a piece of vacant land that they got a fraudulent deed for. And we have a problem. So I had a conversation with the seller's attorney who eventually had to say to me, look, I don't know what you're saying is true. You're just some agent guy trying, jumping in the middle of something that really is not yours. I can't say that my client is or isn't the real person. So I've kind of got to just shut this down for the moment, Jerry. But what I can do is I'll talk to my bookkeeper. If there's funds, because I think we set it up where we're going to be wiring funds to this particular individual. If there's some reason to be concerned, and he said there was a glitch in wiring those funds because the bank, the receiving bank had flagged them so that the seller's attorney, this fraudulent individual hadn't yet gotten the wire. They hadn't gotten the money. But he said, what I can do is we'll kind of put a pause on that. And then I'll try to find out more stuff from my end. But the only thing I can tell you is I can't help your guy out because I don't represent your guy. I represent who may be your guy, but it's a fake guy. It gets a little confusing, right? And I don't know who you are. So, and I get that as a seller's attorney, absolutely 100%. He didn't know who I was. I was a third party trying to help somebody out. That is somebody that is a trusted client that I'm now shocked for. They just had $100,000 or close to $100,000 lot ripped off from them, stolen. So the next call I made is to the buyer, who happened to be a real estate agent. A real estate agent I don't know well, but I know through the years we've had conversations. I left an immediate voicemail for him that, hey, I just want you to know my previous client has identified this is potentially a fraudulent transaction. They did not sell this to you. I want you to be aware so you can contact your attorney tomorrow. I'm working through now the next steps that my client needs to take with them. But if there's, if you're going to put a shovel in the ground or build a house, call me before you start doing anything there, before it gets worse, what we're in, the circumstance. So now I'm connecting the dots, and I've got to kind of figure it out. And I called my client and I said, here's what we need to do. New York State has a attorney general's office. They have a office that specifically is designed to help people that have had deed fraud occurred to them. This office's phone number is 1-800-771-7755. I'll share it later in the podcast as well. I told my former client, here's what you need to do. Tomorrow morning, you need to get your own legal counsel. You need to get a professional attorney to put the parties involved in the transaction. The fake seller, the seller's attorney who represented the fake seller, the buyer's attorney, and the buyer on notice that this is a concern. And then you can start a process to get your title back. You also need to call the state attorney general's office. You may not actually need, this is the advice I gave him. I'm not a lawyer, but the attorney general's office may do all the legal work, but you should still have a local counsel because you don't want this thing to run away. I always find that money, the further it gets away, the harder it is to get back. I was trying to make sure my client addressed it aggressively so that the money wouldn't run away from them. So the following morning, I called the buyer's attorney because I had not heard from the buyer, who I know. She took my call immediately. She said, tell me what you know. Tell me the story. I hear this is going on. Her client called me back 10 minutes after I talked to her and said, hey, I have already talked to my attorney. Whatever we got to do to make this right, we're going to fix this. And they also had made a claim to their title insurance because they fortunately had bought title insurance, which again, I'm going to summarize some things you can do to protect yourself later when you buy something. They had bought title insurance, so they were insured for this kind of situation. And they were being cooperative because to be clear here, the victims in this transaction were the owner that were my former clients who had a deed that was stolen from them with a person that faked and pretended they were them to transfer it to somebody to get the check from the buyer for close to $100,000. The victims were the buyer of the lot who had a fake deed and the real owner of that deed. So the buyer side of this transaction, there's not a problem with. The seller, my seller, they're all now already, I managed to put them all together. They're all on the same page to get this deed back and to recover the buyer's money. And so fundamentally, where that entire thing is at is the purchaser is got their own counsel. I don't know where it's going to end. The buyer and the seller are all trying to work. The buyer and the buyer side are all trying to work together to recover the deed so the seller gets their property back, and to recover the buyer's money so the buyer gets their money back. And some days, for lack of a better description, we all get a little lucky. And I think in this circumstance, and I'll update you in a future podcast when I actually hear the final results, but I feel pretty good about the direction everybody's heading in. Had that owner not gotten a fishy letter and read it and then thought, something doesn't feel right, I should call Jerry, who's kind of always been my boots in the ground in Western New York, and maybe he can have a conversation with me. Had I not luckily taken the call and thought about it while I was on the phone, had I just been like, I'm busy right now, I can't talk, that just sounds like something, throw it out, rather than having him read it, look closely, had I not had a friend of mine that was kind enough, that is in the legal profession, to call me and say, take this seriously, look into this, who also happened to represent in the original closing that client. And had I not happened to have a seller's agent that was taking the phone, that was open, a seller's attorney that took the call that evening, a buyer that responded, and a buyer's attorney that responded that quickly this morning, as well as a couple of attorneys that I called the next morning for this client that kind of specialize in helping with this to give us the direction to correct it, had then all come together, this very easily could have turned into a scenario where a buyer gave or had money wired to the actual not owner, had an owner that didn't know their property transferred, had a buyer build a house on that property, and my owner in 10 years could have come back when it was all long gone and ended up not owning their property and having it stolen from them. And the buyer would then have to deal with the legal challenges and the complications of this title situation way in the future. In this circumstance, it was caught because the Erie County Clerk's Office sent my owner a letter. My owner didn't throw it out and said, I wonder, should I call? I'll call on a local guy that knows real estate and see if he's ever seen this before. And I hadn't. And then the other parties to the transaction all took my calls, all said, the tale you're telling sounds like we could have a problem. Not any of them were uncooperative. And now we're at the point where this is progressing. And I'll tell you what the final conclusions so far are, and what the owner of that property, or the previous owner, the real deeded owner, has done. They filed a police report in Florida, tried to file a police report in the township where it occurred. They have the state attorney general working on a file. They have a local attorney working to get them their deed back via court order. The buyers putting a halt to it, trying to freeze the money. The sellers, the fake seller's attorney is also trying to make sure that nothing runs away. Everybody's put a pause on that deed, and then everybody at one point is going to begin to take corrective action. It may cost the seller a little bit of money. It may cost the buyer a little bit of money, but it won't be costing them $100,000. they were all very lucky. Now, I'm going to try to share with you things you can do as a homeowner or a property owner to try to avoid this sort of thing, to avoid being taken advantage of. And these are going to be some simple things you can do. The Erie County Clerk's Office has a property alert website where you can register your property in Erie County to be alerted to any change in status, mortgage being placed in the property, title, status, all that stuff. And that is ECCLERK, eclerk.erie.gov/property alert. Register your properties there. Number 2, the State Attorney General's Office has a deed fraud division. If you think you are a victim of deed fraud or you've lost a deed that you did not sell, meaning the property was sold without your permission, and you can call 1-800-771-7755. If you do believe you are a victim of this sort of action, you need to file a police report, call the State Attorney General, notify the county clerk's office, which they can't do much except tell you that it occurred. And on top of it, you should get good legal counsel locally to help you through this process to recover the deed. Because this may require a court order, I'm told, to get the deed back. There'll be some legal work here. The other things that can help you to protect yourself a little bit, and this is some of my advice to, first of all, homeowners. One, this may sound funny, but if you have a mortgage on the property, it's a lot harder for them to commit deed fraud. If you don't owe anything, when the property closes, there's no debt, there's no notification to your mortgage company, and they need a closeout statement. If you have a small mortgage on the property, or you have something filed that needs to be notified in your deed of a payout, it's harder for somebody to steal your deed. Secondly, this is more for real estate agents or the Bar Association attorneys in Erie County. Nobody should take a listing and list a property based on an email they got from over the web if they do not know for certain via documentation that the owner is who they say they are. That can mean photo ID. Google their phone number. Google the address. Find out that the individual you think you are representing is truly them. Number 2, when you get a contract and they've electronically signed it and you've sent it to an attorney, the Erie County Bar Association attorneys should not be transferring the property with an out-of-state notary without being 100% certain that the owner is who they say they are. As a buyer, how do you protect yourself? When you are buying a property and you're giving money to that seller, you need to have clear title. You then get a deed. Your attorney should ask the seller's attorney for a verification of who the seller is and that they honestly know who they are. If a deed is coming with an out-of-state notary document, or the seller is not showing up at closing personally and documenting their personal identity via a passport or some other way to prove that who they are, you need to raise a question as a buyer's attorney. Please do that. This is the first one I've experienced, but I'm telling you, it's probably not going to be the last that I've seen. I get emails as a regular basis from listing agent from people that are saying, I'd like you to list a piece of land out in Franklinville for me. And I often respond with that. And I've been doing it for months because I knew that this was a risk. Geez, I need more documentation of the land. You need to send me a survey or the deed or the legal description so that I can find the site. And usually when I ask those questions, the people disappear. More often than not, they look like AI. The emails are not clear, so you kind of can get a sense. If you're a listing agent, you're a selling agent, and you have this vibe like something's off, don't do it. Number two, often when you're buying a property, you'll have your attorney, as a buyer's attorney, say to you, I've reviewed the title, but would you like title insurance? Up until 2020 or so, I used to think title insurance, that's never a problem here. In fact, I bought stuff in the past without title insurance because I'm like to my attorney, did you clear the title? Did you look at everything? Is it good? Yeah, it's good. No problem. No more. When you're a buyer, your attorney will offer you the opportunity to pay a one-time title insurance policy. Buy the title insurance. That way, if something like this comes up, you can file a claim against that insurance, which will insure you against loss for unclear or poor title transfer. Buy the title insurance. Couple helpful, and again, I don't want to sound crazy on this, tips and tricks. If you don't have a mortgage, let's say you have a house and you don't have a mortgage, you could get a home equity line of credit for $50,000 and never use it. It's a debt against the house, and then set up that account that if any requests are made, you get notified on your phone. You get notified before anybody tries to transfer anything. Pay attention to your properties. Most of the victims of this type of deed fraud are individuals who live out of the area, and they are hunks of vacant land. That's the low-hanging fruit for these predators. They look for a vacant lot, out-of-area owner. They try to find an unsuspecting listing broker who lists the property, giving the property credibility. They sign everything electronically. Then the listing broker recommends an attorney to them. They go to this attorney, and then they try to transfer the deed through that law firm quickly without anybody noticing, because the deed has come notarized from out of the area, and that notary is supposed to verify who they are for that attorney. In this case, they clearly didn't. Then get the deed transferred before anybody notices, and that out-of-state owner comes driving up here and never knows that it's not their property until they drive by and see a house on it. Couple other tips. I'd suggest going to a lot of the prevalent real estate websites for you, and any property you own, claim it so that you get updates on your property from Zillow or Realtor.com or Homes.com or all three. Any property that gets listed with a broker, for the most part, will be listed there publicly. You may get notification on your phone that your property is listed when you didn't list it. That will help protect you early. Ask neighbors. If you see a sign on my property, let me know right away. Because I think for the most part, these deed fraud individuals are looking for low-hanging fruit. They need to get credibility immediately, so they find a broker that thinks they're an out-of-town owner, which is validated on the public records. You see that owner lives in Texas. So you think, as an agent, I'm doing business for an out-of-state owner. It gives them credibility. It gets to an attorney. I'm not trying to throw gasoline on everybody involved in the transaction, because I think there's a lot of victims here. But I do think there's a lesson to be learned, and that is brokers don't take listings unless you know who they are. Attorneys do not transfer deeds unless you know who they are. Buyers, ask your attorney, and buyers' attorneys, make sure that your buyers get title insurance to cover them. Homeowners, do things you can do, and landowners, to protect your title. Register at eccclerk.erie.gov, property alert, for your title changes notification immediately to you. Keep the state attorney general's website, which is ag.newyork.gov/publications/deed theft. There's a hyphen in there, deed-theft, in case you do feel you're the victim of one of these situations. And learn by what I'm trying to share right now. This happens. This happens in Buffalo, New York. This happens with even though we're closing property with a listing broker, a selling attorney, a buyer's attorney, and a buyer, everyone involved in that transaction is a professional that does this often. There's places maybe the ball could have been protected a little bit more, but none of what occurred is what I would consider to be non-standard practice. And I think today, in today's day and age, we all need to really start to recognize that when you own a property, you need to protect your deed. You need to protect your property. You need to pay attention to your property because deed theft is real and deed theft happens. Hopefully by sharing this story, people will learn something. I will, somewhere in the future, hopefully I get that call from my client that says it's all set. I know that everybody involved in that transaction is now in communication and they all are focused on writing this. So I'm hoping that becomes a happy ending. But this is something that had we not gotten a lucky bounce, could have cost the buyer some significant pain, cost the seller significant pain, and somebody somewhere in the country could have $100,000 in their pocket or $90,000 in their, whatever that number was, in their pocket that wasn't their money. As always, I appreciate you watching You Own It. Hopefully this is a helpful lesson. I will try to find out in the future, after I learn a little more about how to protect your deed even better, what can be done. But register your properties, register them at the county clerk's office, register them on any of the major portals, keep an eye on them, ask neighbors to keep an eye on them, make sure that nothing that you own gets sold without your permission. Thanks again. Thank you so much for tuning in to You Own It. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any resources mentioned during the show. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow us on your favorite podcast apps, and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and greatest. All of our social channels are clickable in the show notes as well. I'd also like to remind you to check out our website, c21jerry.com. There you'll find more info on me as well as my latest listings for all of Western New York. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, through any big decision, you own it.